Dear friends, subscribe and hit the bell. Your support allows us to continue our investigations. The history of the Russian Civil War is full of heroes whose names resonated throughout the country, and those who were unjustly forgotten. Among the latter is Boris Dumenko, a man who stood at the origins of the legendary Red Cavalry. In the whirlwind of revolutionary events of 1917 to 1920, his figure flashed like a bright meteor, leaving a deep mark on military history, but was then erased from official chronicles. A Don Cossack, a talented natural without military education, he managed to create a formidable force, cavalry units that became the basis of the future First Cavalry Army. However, his merits were attributed to others, and he himself fell victim to political intrigues and the struggle for power within the ranks of the Red Command. Dumenko's tragedy is not just a personal drama of a talented military leader. It is a story of how revolution devours its heroes, how true merits can be appropriated by others, and how inconvenient talents can be destroyed by the very system they faithfully served. Boris Dumenko was born in 1888 in the Khutor Kazachi Komutets of the Stanitsa Velikoknyazhskaya, Don Host Oblast, into a family of hereditary Cossacks. From childhood, he absorbed the traditions of the free Cossacks, where horsemanship was valued above all else. His father, Moki Nikitich, a simple Cossack plowman, accustomed his son from an early age to hard peasant labor and military skills. Boris grew up a strong, quick-witted young man with an independent character, so typical of Don Cossacks. He received his initial education in a parish school, but his formal schooling ended there. Necessity forced him to start working early. At the age of 25, Dumenko was called up for active service in the Tsarist army. The First World War found him in the ranks of the 9th Don Cossack Regiment. On the fronts of the Great War, Boris proved himself to be a brave warrior and a skilled fighter. In 4 years of battles, he rose to the rank of Wachtmeister, the highest rank for enlisted cavalrymen, and was awarded 4 St. George's Crosses, which testified to his exceptional valor. However, the revolutionary events of 1917 changed the fate of many, including Boris Dumenko. Returning from the front to the Don, he found himself at the epicenter of political contradictions tearing the Cossacks apart. Some Cossacks supported the White Movement, but many, especially from the poorer strata, to which Dumenko also belonged, joined the Bolsheviks. They were attracted by slogans of fair land distribution and equality of all estates. In the spring of 1918, Dumenko organized the first Red Cavalry detachment from frontline Cossacks like himself. This small detachment of 120 sabers became the embryo of the future formidable cavalry formations of the Red Army. Among his first comrades in arms was Semyon Budyonny, who served under Dumenko and was then his closest assistant. Boris quickly proved himself not only a brave warrior, but also a talented organizer and commander. He possessed a natural military instinct, the ability to make unconventional decisions and to lead people. His authority among the fighters was indisputable. The Cossacks trusted their commander, seeing in him not a superior appointed from above, but someone from their own midst, understanding their needs and aspirations. At the beginning of 1918, the Red Cavalry existed only as disparate detachments, lacking both a unified command and a clear structure. It was Boris Dumenko who was destined to change this situation. His first detachment of 120 sabers rapidly expanded, reinforced by frontline Cossacks, peasants, and workers who saw in the revolution a chance for a better life. By the summer of the same year, a cavalry regiment was already operating under Dumenko's command, and by autumn, a brigade numbering over 1,000 horsemen. Dumenko's talent as an organizer manifested in his ability to create an effective system for training fighters and commanders. He personally conducted exercises, imparting his rich combat experience to his subordinates. Special attention was paid to maneuverability and surprise attacks, qualities that later became the hallmark of the Red Cavalry. Dumenko's military genius also manifested in tactical innovations. He was one of the first to understand that in the conditions of the Civil War, cavalry could be not just an auxiliary branch of troops, but an independent strike force. Dumenko developed tactics of deep raids into the enemy's rear, combined attacks using machine gun carts, which allowed his units to deliver lightning-fast strikes and disappear before the enemy could organize a counterattack. By the beginning of 1919, Dumenko's cavalry brigade had transformed into a formidable force that the White Guard Command was forced to reckon with. After a series of successful operations against General Krasnov's troops, the brigade was reorganized into a cavalry division and then into a cavalry corps. It was this corps that became the foundation upon which the famous First Cavalry Army was later formed. It is important to note that Dumenko created his units practically from scratch, in conditions of acute shortages of weapons, uniforms, and provisions. He personally dealt with supply issues, often displaying miracles of inventiveness. Captured weapons seized from the Whites became the main source of replenishing the arsenal. Horse stock was replenished through requisitions from wealthy farms and captured spoils. The spring of 1919 marked the first serious victories of cavalry units under the command of Boris Dumenko. In the battles near the village of Velikoknyazheskaya, his fighters demonstrated tactical prowess, which soon became the hallmark of the Red Cavalry. White Guard units of General Mamontov, superior to the Reds in number and armament, were routed thanks to Dumenko's unconventional decision. He divided his forces into 3 groups, 2 of which delivered flanking blows, while the third, reinforced with machine gun carts, attacked head-on. The Whites, not expecting such audacity, were crushed and put to flight. Dumenko's military talent was particularly evident in the battle for Tsaritsyn in the summer of the same year. When the White troops almost closed the encirclement around the city, it was Dumenko's cavalrymen who conducted a deep raid behind enemy lines, destroying their convoys, artillery positions, and headquarters. This raid not only saved Tsaritsyn, but also demonstrated a new role for cavalry in modern warfare, as a mobile strike force capable of solving strategic tasks. Dumenko constantly improved the tactics of his units. He was the first to practice dismounting cavalrymen for fighting on foot, which allowed for effective action in difficult terrain. His fighters knew how to instantly switch from defense to offense, widely used ambushes and feigned retreats, luring the enemy into the path of the main forces. In August 1919, Dumenko's cavalry corps conducted a brilliant operation to liberate Rostov. Bypassing the fortified White positions, the Red Cavalry suddenly attacked the city from the rear, causing panic among Denikin's forces. This victory had immense strategic importance, opening the way for the Reds to the North Caucasus. Dumenko's authority among his fighters was undeniable. He was loved for his personal bravery. He was always at the forefront of the attack, inspiring his fighters by his own example. There is a known instance when, at a critical moment in the battle near the village of Orlovskaya, Dumenko personally led a reserve squadron into the attack, turning the tide of the battle. Wounded in the shoulder, he did not leave the battlefield until the complete rout of the enemy. The High Command of the Southern Front highly appreciated Dumenko's services. The Order of the Revolutionary Military Council noted, Comrade Dumenko's cavalry corps showed examples of revolutionary valor and military art. For his military merits, Boris Mokievich was awarded the Order of the Red Banner, the highest military award of the young Soviet Republic. The history of the relationship between Boris Dumenko and Semyon Budyonny is a complex drama that began with combat brotherhood and ended in a rivalry that cost the life of one of the most talented cavalry commanders of the Civil War. Their paths crossed in early 1918, when Budyonny, then a little-known non-commissioned officer of the Tsarist army, joined Dumenko's detachment. Initially, they were united by a common goal: the struggle for revolution and the interests of the working Cossacks. Budyonny, recognizing Dumenko's military talent, became his right hand, deputy, and loyal comrade in arms. In the first battles, they fought side by side, together experiencing defeats and sharing the joy of victories. However, as the scale of their cavalry formations grew, differences between the commanders also began to emerge. Dumenko was a natural tactician, a military prodigy, but at the same time a straightforward man, not prone to political games. He often clashed with commissars, believing that military decisions should be made by professionals, not political workers. Budyonny, on the other hand, proved to be a more flexible leader, capable of finding common ground with the political leadership. This quality did not go unnoticed in Moscow, where reliable, politically loyal commanders were sought. A turning point in their relationship came in the autumn of 1919. After a series of brilliant victories by Dumenko's corps, the High Command decided to form the First Cavalry Army. It would have been logical to appoint Dumenko, the creator of the Red Cavalry, as its commander. However, the choice fell on Budyonny. Several factors contributed to this: Dumenko's severe wound, received in battle near Voronezh, his strained relations with political workers, and, most importantly, Budyonny's support from Stalin, then a member of the Revolutionary Military Council of the Southern Front. For Dumenko, this was a bitter blow. The man who created the cavalry, who forged it in battles, was pushed aside, and his former subordinate led an army, the core of which consisted of units formed by Dumenko. Nevertheless, Boris Mokievich continued to honestly serve the revolution, commanding his corps. Budyonny, having received a high appointment, gradually distanced himself from his former commander. When clouds gathered over Dumenko, when the first accusations began, Budyonny did not extend a helping hand to the one who once led him to military glory. Dumenko's tragedy reflected the ruthless logic of the revolution, devouring its children, and human relationships breaking under the weight of career ambitions and political expediency. By 1920, the Red Army was no longer the motley revolutionary force it had been at its inception. Spontaneity was giving way to strict hierarchy, discipline, and, most importantly, political control. The institution of military commissars, initially created to oversee former Tsarist officers, was gradually transforming into a powerful instrument of party influence over the army. In this new coordinate system, the figure of Boris Dumenko became increasingly inconvenient for the authorities. He was too independent, too popular among the soldiers, and, crucially, not a member of the Bolshevik Party. A non-party military specialist, relying on personal authority and combat experience rather than political directives, he aroused growing distrust among the commissars. Dumenko made no secret of his irritation when political workers without military experience interfered in military matters. Those who know how to fight should command in war. This phrase, uttered by him at one of the meetings, was perceived as a challenge to the system. The commissars, in turn, regularly sent reports to the center about the corps commander's quote and Commissar Mikaladze, who was assigned to Dumenko's corps after several conflicts between the commander and previous political workers, was particularly assiduous. Mikaladze methodically collected incriminating evidence against Dumenko, looking for any signs of dissatisfaction with party policy among his inner circle. Dumenko's position was also complicated by the fact that, against the backdrop of Budyonny's growing fame, his own achievements were gradually being overshadowed. Newspapers increasingly wrote about the legendary Budyonny, and less about the creator of the Red Cavalry. This could not but wound Dumenko's self-esteem, accustomed to a fair assessment of his merits. The conflict reached its climax in early 1920, when Dumenko's corps was engaged in heavy fighting with the White Guards in the North Caucasus. In one of the battles, Commissar Mikaladze died under unclear circumstances. The official version stated that he was killed as a result of artillery shelling, but rumors of intentional elimination soon emerged. For the political leadership, this became a convenient pretext for dealing with the inconvenient commander. Dumenko and several of his closest associates were arrested on charges of murdering the commissar and counter-revolutionary conspiracy. The last, most tragic chapter in the life of the creator of the Red Cavalry was beginning. By the summer of 1919, the cavalry corps under the command of Boris Dumenko had transformed into a formidable force, striking terror into White Guard units. His fighters, hardened in continuous battles, possessed incredible maneuverability and a fighting spirit that even the enemy's best units might envy. The fame of, quote, "Zero" spread throughout the southern front. In July, Dumenko's corps carried out a brilliant operation in the vicinity of the Velikoknyazhskaya Stanitsa. The Whites, who had numerical superiority, were preparing to strike the flank of the main Red forces. Dumenko, having received this intelligence, made an unconventional decision: to attack the enemy first, not frontally, but with an enveloping maneuver. Dividing his forces into 3 groups, he sent 2 of them to bypass the White positions, while with the main forces, he simulated a frontal offensive. The White Guards, not expecting such audacity, found themselves semi-encircled and were forced to retreat hastily, abandoning artillery and convoys. Pursuing the enemy, Dumenko's men covered over 70 versts in a day, which seemed incredible even for cavalry. This raid became a classic example of using cavalry mobility and entered military art textbooks. Dumenko's military talent was particularly evident in the August battles near Tsaritsyn. When Denikin's troops almost closed the ring around the city, the situation seemed critical. It was then that Dumenko proposed to the front command a plan for a daring operation, a deep raid into the enemy's rear to destroy his communications and headquarters. Having received approval, he personally led his corps on this dangerous raid. Moving mainly at night, avoiding major clashes, the Red Horsemen suddenly appeared in the most unexpected places, sowing panic and destruction. They destroyed ammunition depots, cut communication lines, and routed rear units and headquarters. As a result, the White offensive stalled. Without supplies and command, their units began to retreat, fearing encirclement. For this operation, Dumenko was awarded his Second Order of the Red Banner and received personal gratitude from the front commander. The order noted, "Comrade Dumenko showed examples of revolutionary valor and military skill, worthy of emulation by all commanders of the Red Army." The Republic's high military leadership highly appreciated Dumenko's merits. Commander Shorin wrote in a report to Moscow, "Dumenko's cavalry corps is the most combat-ready formation of the front. Its commander possesses exceptional tactical acumen and enjoys undeniable authority among the fighters." In the autumn of 1919, Dumenko's corps participated in the general offensive of the Southern Front against Denikin. During this operation, Dumenko's men made a swift dash to Rostov, covering over 200 versts with battles in a week. This forced march became legendary. All frontline newspapers wrote about it. In one of the battles near the Orlovskaya Stanitsa, Dumenko was seriously wounded, but refused to leave the battlefield, continuing to direct the actions of his units. Only after the complete defeat of the enemy did he agree to evacuation to a hospital. This injury temporarily put him out of action, which had far-reaching consequences for his future fate. The first signs of impending trouble appeared at the end of 1919. Boris Dumenko, at the peak of his military glory, increasingly faced growing discontent from political workers. His straightforwardness, unwillingness to obey commissars in military matters, and, most importantly, his non-party affiliation became a serious problem in the changing Red Army. At one of the meetings of the Southern Front headquarters, Dumenko allowed himself a sharp remark. "Those who know how to fight should fight, not those who know how to talk about war." These words, thrown in the face of party workers, were neither forgotten nor forgiven. The political department of the front began to compile a dossier on the intractable commander. Commissar Mikaladze, sent to Dumenko's corps with an unspoken assignment to establish strict control over the commander, played a special role in this story. The young, ambitious political worker meticulously recorded every critical remark by Dumenko, every instance of insubordination to directives emanating from political bodies. Reports of Dumenko's insufficient political consciousness, remnants of partisanism, and indulgence of Cossack willfulness regularly went to the front headquarters. It was especially emphasized that the corps commander surrounded himself with equally non-party commanders, creating an unreliable environment. Trusting relationships with the fighters, which had always been Dumenko's strength, were now presented as a danger. In one report, Mikaladze wrote, quote, "The situation was exacerbated by the fact that Dumenko's name was mentioned less and less in the press." Newspapers were full of headlines about the legendary Budyonny and his First Cavalry, while the merits of the creator of the Red Cavalry were gradually consigned to oblivion. This could not but offend Dumenko's self-esteem, accustomed to a fair assessment of his contribution to the revolution. In January 1920, when Dumenko's corps was engaged in heavy fighting in the North Caucasus, a fatal incident occurred. Under unexplained circumstances, Commissar Mikaladze died. According to the official version, he was killed by a shell fragment during an artillery bombardment. But another version soon emerged, about the deliberate elimination of the undesirable commissar. This incident became the perfect pretext for dealing with the inconvenient commander. A week after Mikaladze's death, a special commission arrived at the corps and began an investigation. Dozens of witnesses were interrogated, many of whom, under pressure, gave testimony that suited the investigation. The murder of Commissar Mikaladze became the fateful point from which Boris Dumenko's rapid downfall began. The tragedy occurred on February 6, 1920, during battles with White Guard units near the Shablievskaya Stanitsa. According to the official version, the commissar died during an artillery shelling while on the front lines. However, within a few days, this version was called into question by a special commission that arrived from the front headquarters. The investigation took a clearly accusatory turn from the very beginning. The investigators, without concealing their intentions, sought not the truth, but evidence of Dumenko's guilt. The key witness was Mikaladze's orderly, who claimed to have seen the corps commander order his associates to eliminate the commissar. Later, after Dumenko's execution, This witness confessed that he had given false testimony under pressure from investigators, fearing for his own life. An analysis of the case materials reveals glaring contradictions. According to the medical report, Mikaladze's death resulted from a shrapnel wound, characteristic of an artillery shell. However, the indictment already featured a gunshot wound to the back of the head, a typical sign of premeditated murder. This substitution of facts became one of the main tools for fabricating the case. Another serious contradiction concerned the time of the commissar's death. According to the testimony of several staff officers, Mikaladze died around noon, when Dumenko was elsewhere, at a meeting with brigade commanders which was confirmed by dozens of witnesses. However, the investigation simply ignored this testimony. It is particularly telling that many testimonies in Dumenko's favor were not even included in the case materials. Brigade commanders, squadron commanders, ordinary soldiers, everyone who tried to speak about their commander's innocence found themselves under suspicion of complicity. It is also important to note that Dumenko had no real motive to eliminate Mikaladze. Despite the complex relationship, the Corps commander always resolved conflicts openly, not surreptitiously. Moreover, the murder of the commissar would inevitably lead to an investigation and problems, which was obvious to an experienced commander. The entire prosecution's case was built on sand, but this did not matter to those who decided Dumenko's fate. Mikaladze's murder became merely a convenient pretext to eliminate an inconvenient figure, too independent and popular among the soldiers. On February 16, 1920, Boris Dumenko was arrested, along with a group of his closest associates. He was accused not only of the commissar's murder, but also of preparing a counter-revolutionary rebellion, a standard addition for political cases of that time. The talented commander, the creator of the Red Cavalry, was declared an enemy of the revolution, which he had faithfully served from its earliest days. On February 24, 1920, Boris Dumenko was arrested in the stanitsa of Velikoknyazeskaya. The operation was carried out suddenly. A special detachment surrounded the Corps headquarters at night, when most of the commanders were asleep. Dumenko offered no resistance, though he could have attempted to escape or even rallied his loyal units to his defense. He believed until the very end that a misunderstanding had occurred, which would soon be resolved. Along with him, his closest associates were arrested: Chief of Staff Abramov, Brigade Commanders Kolpakov and Kravchenko, and Adjutant Filatov. All of them were charged with the same accusation: the murder of Commissar Mikaladze and the preparation of a counter-revolutionary mutiny. The investigation was conducted with glaring violations even of the legal norms of that time. Dumenko and his comrades were transported to Rostov-on-Don, where they were placed in the basement of the Cheka building. Interrogations were conducted predominantly at night, without protocols or witnesses. The investigators made no secret that their task was not to ascertain the truth, but to confirm a pre-formulated accusation. Particular pressure was exerted on potential defense witnesses. Commanders and soldiers of Dumenko's corps who tried to speak in his support were intimidated, arrested, and some were even subjected to physical abuse. As a result, many gave testimonies dictated by investigators, fearing for their own lives. The fate of Squadron Commander Kovalev, who tried to declare Dumenko's innocence, is indicative. After interrogation, he was arrested as an accomplice, and 3 days later was shot while attempting to escape. This incident served as a clear lesson for other witnesses. The case materials were fabricated with incredible speed and carelessness. The indictment featured events that did not happen and witnesses who never testified. Some documents contained such gross contradictions that they had to be rewritten during the course of the investigation. Dumenko himself remained steadfast, despite the harsh conditions of detention and the pressure from investigators. He categorically denied all charges, demanded face-to-face confrontations with witnesses, and insisted that the case against him was fabricated for political reasons. In one of the letters secretly smuggled out of prison, he wrote, "They want to destroy me, not for a crime I did not commit, but for being too straightforward and unable to bend to the commissars." Dumenko particularly suffered from the betrayal of former comrades. Many commanders who owed their positions to him hastened to disavow their arrested superior. The most painful blow was the silence of Budyonny, who made no attempt to intercede for the man who had once promoted him to command positions. The trial of Boris Dumenko began on May 24, 1920, in Rostov-on-Don. The process, inherently intended to establish the truth, transformed into an outright farce from its very first minutes. The traveling session of the Revolutionary Tribunal took place in the building of the former district court, but no trace of justice remained within those walls. Presiding Judge Ja Wilkes made no secret of his bias, interrupting the defense and allowing the prosecution to put forward the most absurd theories without evidence. The indictment was read for almost 3 hours, a long list of crimes allegedly committed by Dumenko against the revolution. Among them, the main one remained the murder of Commissar Mikoladze, but to this were added the preparation of a counter-revolutionary mutiny, ties with White Guards, and even espionage for Poland. Each accusation was more ludicrous than the last, yet the tribunal accepted them as proven facts. Dumenko's defense lawyers, appointed by the tribunal, showed no particular zeal in fulfilling their duties. They were more creating the appearance of a fair trial than genuinely attempting to save the defendants. When one of the lawyers tried to point out obvious contradictions in the testimonies of key witnesses, the chairman rudely cut him off, threatening removal from the courtroom. Dumenko himself maintained astonishing dignity. Exhausted by 3 months of imprisonment, with a gray stubble on his gaunt face, he nevertheless remained calm and clear-headed. To the question of pleading guilty, he firmly replied, quote, "0." His attempts to explain the circumstances of Mikoladze's death were constantly interrupted by the chairman. When Dumenko asked to call witnesses who could confirm his alibi, he was refused under the pretext of wartime and the need for a swift decision. The trial, planned for 3 days, concluded in 1. Prosecution witnesses gave confused testimonies, often contradicting each other and themselves. But the tribunal paid no attention to this. The key witness, Mikoladze's orderly, mechanically repeated the same phrase. "Dumenko ordered the commissar killed. I heard it myself." When asked by the defense where and when he heard this, the witness faltered and could not give a clear answer. On May 6, 1920, the prison commandant entered Boris Dumenko's cell with a sheet of paper in his hands. Without further ado, he read the sentence. Dumenko listened to his death sentence in silence. Only the deep furrows on his brow betrayed his inner tension. After the sentence was pronounced, he was allowed to write a few letters. In his address to the Revolutionary Military Council of the Republic, he firmly declared, quote, 1. In a letter to his former comrades, he asked them not to seek revenge for him, but to continue defending the revolution. Especially poignant was his last letter to his wife, quote, 2. On the night of May 10th to 11th, Dumenko and his 4 comrades were led out into the prison yard. According to eyewitnesses, the commander remained calm and dignified. When offered a blindfold, he refused. Quote, 3. His last words were, "The volley thundered in the pre-dawn twilight. Thus ended the life of the creator of the Red Cavalry. Dumenko's body was buried in an unmarked grave on the outskirts of Rostov. The authorities feared that his burial place might become a pilgrimage site for his former subordinates. News of Dumenko's execution evoked various reactions. The official press presented it as, quote, 5, quote, the newspaper, quote, 6, quote. Red Star published an article depicting the former corps commander as a, quote, 7, quote. Among the soldiers of Dumenko's former corps, the news of his death caused muffled indignation. Several squadron commanders submitted their resignations, but they were quickly persuaded to withdraw their applications. In some units, spontaneous demonstrations in defense of the commander's memory occurred, which were brutally suppressed by special departments. Budyonny's reaction was the most telling. Upon receiving news of the execution of his former commander, he merely remarked dryly, "The revolution does not forgive treason." The man to whom Dumenko had given a start to a great military career found not a single kind word in his memory. Thus concluded the life of Boris Dumenko, a talented natural genius who created the Red Cavalry and fell victim to political intrigues. His name was erased from the history of the Civil War for many decades, and his merits were attributed to others. After Dumenko's execution, a systematic effort began to rewrite the history of the First Cavalry Army's creation. In official documents, newspaper publications, and memoirs of participants, Boris Mokiewicz's role first began to be downplayed and then disappeared entirely. Semyon Budyonny was put in his place, gradually being credited with all the merits in the creation and establishment of the Red Cavalry. In the autumn of 1920, the first articles appeared in central newspapers where Budyonny was referred to not just as a commander, but as the creator of the First Cavalry. The political directorate of the Red Army issued a brochure titled, quote, which claimed that it was he who, in early 1918, organized the First Cavalry detachments on the Don. There was not a word about Dumenko, as if this man had never existed. By the mid-20s, the process of mythologizing Budyonny had taken on a statewide scale. Books were published, films were made, and songs were composed, glorifying the, quote, one. His name became synonymous with the Red Cavalry, a symbol of its victories and glory. The famous song, quote, 2, definitively cemented in the public consciousness the image of Budyonny as the sole creator of cavalry victories. The fate of archival documents from that period is telling. Many orders, dispatches, and reports that mentioned Dumenko's name were removed or edited. In the memoirs of Civil War participants published in the 20s and 30s, editors meticulously struck out any mention of the executed commander. If it was impossible to completely avoid mentioning him, Dumenko was portrayed as a secondary figure, subordinate to Budyonny, which completely distorted historical reality. Budyonny's own memoirs, quote, 3 played a special role in creating the myth, where he presented himself as the main organizer of the Red Cavalry. In these memoirs, Dumenko was mentioned only in passing, as one of many commanders, and with a clear negative connotation. Budyonny did not hesitate to attribute to himself victories won by units under Dumenko's command, and tactical innovations, first applied by Boris Mokiewicz himself. By the 30s, the falsification process was complete. In the official historiography of the Civil War, Dumenko was either not mentioned at all or characterized as an exposed enemy of the people. His name was erased from history textbooks, encyclopedias, and memoirs. An entire generation of Soviet people grew up without knowing who actually created the glorious Red Cavalry. Justice in history often comes late, but it does come. For Boris Dumenko, it was 44 years too late. Only in 1964, during Khrushchev's thaw, was the case of the creator of the Red Cavalry finally reviewed. The Military Collegium of the Supreme Court of the USSR overturned the 1920 verdict and fully rehabilitated Dumenko and his associates due to the absence of a crime. The rehabilitation process began with an appeal from several Civil War veterans who had served under Dumenko. In their letter to the Central Committee of the CPSU, they requested the restoration of their commander's good name and spoke of his true role in the creation of the Red Cavalry. This appeal reached then Minister of Defense Rodion Malinovsky, who ordered a study of archival materials. The investigative team of the Chief Military Prosecutor's Office conducted a thorough investigation. Documents from archives were retrieved, and surviving witnesses of the 1920 events were interviewed. The results were astounding. The prosecutor's conclusion stated, "The charges against Dumenko were completely fabricated. The investigation materials contain numerous contradictions. Witness testimonies were obtained under pressure, and key documents were forged." Particularly important was the testimony of former orderly Mikaladze, who in 1963 confessed that he had given false testimony against Dumenko under threat of execution. A medical examination, conducted based on preserved documents, confirmed that Mikaladze's wound was indeed shrapnel, not a bullet wound, as claimed at the trial. This definitively proved that the commissar died from enemy artillery fire and was not killed on Dumenko's order. Why did the restoration of historical justice take so long? There were several reasons. During the Stalinist era, the review of such cases was practically impossible. Too many high-ranking officials were interested in preserving the created myth. Budyonny, who became a marshal and a member of the Central Committee, actively hindered any attempts to recall Dumenko's role. Even after Stalin's death, the process was slow. The myth of Budyonny as the creator of the First Cavalry Army had become so firmly entrenched in official historiography that its revision required significant effort. Moreover, many documents were destroyed or edited, which complicated the restoration of the truth. After rehabilitation, Dumenko's name gradually began to return to the history of the Civil War. In 1965, the first scholarly article dedicated to his role in the creation of the Red Cavalry was published. Then came books that truthfully covered the activities of the forgotten commander. In the stanitsa of Velikoknyazhskaya, renamed Proletarsk, a monument to Dumenko was erected. Streets in several cities of the Rostov region were named after him. However, full historical justice never arrived. In the public consciousness, Budyonny remained the main hero of the cavalry epic. School textbooks only briefly mentioned Dumenko, and songs and films continued to glorify, quote, one. The true history of the creation of the Red Cavalry remained known only to a narrow circle of specialists, quote, end quote. Dumenko's rehabilitation was an important but belated act of restoring historical justice. It showed that even after decades, the truth is capable of breaking through layers of lies and myths. But it also demonstrated how difficult it is to correct distortions of history when they become part of official ideology and mass culture. History abhors a vacuum. When the names of true heroes are erased from it, others take their places, sometimes by chance, sometimes undeservingly. The fate of Boris Dumenko is a vivid example of how political expediency distorts historical truth, transforming it into a convenient myth serving the interests of power. From the perspective of modern historical science, Dumenko's role in the creation of the Red Cavalry is beyond doubt. Archival documents, eyewitness accounts, even indirect evidence all indicate that it was this Don Cossack who laid the foundations of the cavalry that became legendary. His tactical innovations, organizational talent, and personal bravery made possible the victories that were later attributed to others. What lessons can we draw from Dumenko's tragic fate? The first and most obvious is the danger of substituting historical truth with ideological constructs. When history becomes a handmaiden to politics, not only does science suffer, national self-awareness is distorted. A false understanding of the past is formed, which inevitably affects the present and the future. The second lesson concerns the personal fate of a talented individual in a transitional era. Revolution, as is known, devours its children. Dumenko, who selflessly served the revolution, was destroyed by a system that tolerated neither independence nor independent judgment. His tragedy is a warning to all who believe in the absolute justice of revolutionary transformations. The third lesson is about the danger of the cult of personality in all its manifestations. The glorification of Budyonny, his transformation into the sole creator of the Red Cavalry, required not merely the downplaying, but the complete annihilation of the memory of Dumenko. This is how the mechanism of creating artificial heroes works, through the oblivion of genuine ones. Finally, Dumenko's story reminds us of the fragility of human life in the face of the state machine. One stroke of a pen, one political decision, and a person is not just physically destroyed, but erased from the memory of generations, as if they never existed. Today, a century after the events described, we have the opportunity to restore historical justice. Modern research is returning the name of Boris Dumenko to its rightful place in the history of the Civil War. But it is impossible to fully overcome the consequences of decades of silence and falsification. The created myth has too deeply ingrained itself in public consciousness.